I wish you a good evening, all of those of you practicing in the Buddhist religion. I'll give you some advice tonight on some ways and techniques to use in meditation, with techniques to help calm your mind, make your mind peaceful. Because if you don't understand how to calm your mind, make your mind peaceful, then your mind is weak or without energy. As long as your mind is not peaceful and is lacking energy, then it will chase after moods and sense objects. The Buddha thus gave us, his disciples, various techniques, methods for quietening the mind through meditation. The very beginning of meditation is to practice mindfulness of breathing, the in-breaths and the out-breaths. Everybody breathes, so it's an object that's very convenient and practical to use for meditation. Merely establish mindfulness on the in-breaths and the out-breaths. You don't have to force the breath to be any way. You don't have to force the breath to be shorter or longer than usual. Even though there are many of us sitting here together, try to imagine as if you're sitting sitting alone. There's no one else around. As you're practicing mindfulness of breathing, the mind will tend to run away, stray away from the breath and go thinking about all sorts of different things. Try to keep re-establishing mindfulness on the breath, and when you are mindful of an in-breath, then you can count 1. And if when you breathe out, then count 1, just the same, 1 in-breath, 1 out-breath. And then a second in-breath, count 2, second out-breath, count 2. Another in and another out-breath, count 3. And count an in-breath and out-breath, it's 4. Another in and out-breath is 5. Having reached 5, you could go back to 1 again after the 5th in and out breath. Then the next in and out breath, count 1 again, back up to 5. Having gone up to 5, then maybe the next in and out breath, count 6 and 7 and so on. And go up to 10. Then go back after the 10th in and out breath, go back the next in breath, out breath, count 1 again. This is a simple technique for establishing mindfulness on the breathing. Having practiced like that, if your mind is still not very peaceful, it's still very confused or agitated, thinking a lot, then try taking in a very, very deep breath until you've completely filled your lungs with air, and then let all that air out again. And repeat this, do this 3 times, take 3 deep breaths and let them out again. Don't try and force the breath. Try and find a posture that is comfortable, alert but comfortable, and find a rhythm for the breath that is comfortable. If you keep practicing like this, counting the breaths up to 10, back and then back to 1 again, repeat the exercise, the mind will gradually calm down, and as it becomes one-pointed and peaceful, then that process of counting will stop all by itself, and the mind will settle on will be mindful on the breath by itself. as the mind calms down and becomes peaceful, there will just be the knowing of the breath. As there's an in-breath, there's the knowing of it. As there's an out-breath, there's the knowing of it. The mind won't be thinking about anything else or lost in thoughts, proliferations. There'll just be the knowing of the in-breaths and the out-breaths. As the mind becomes peaceful and mindfulness is established consistently on the breaths, the in-breath, the out-breath, then you might start to experience different things, different feelings within the body and the mind. These experiences you start to have as the mind becomes peaceful. For example, you might experience goosebumps, like your hairs stand on end. Feelings, the body feels very light and at ease, relaxed. Maybe tears start to form in the eyes, start to shed tears. Maybe you have the feeling as if waves breaking on a shore within your body, the feeling waves sweeping over the body and breaking on a shore. Or very, very pleasant feelings, the body feels very, very light, the body and the mind feel very light, as if you're floating on air, maybe even floating up to the ceiling, and your body seems to fill the entire room that you're sitting in. In the language of the Dhamma, these phenomena we call piti.
ซึ่งมีทั้ง5ประการ
There are 5 different kinds of piti. What it means when these different experiences of piti manifest in the mind, it means the mind will be very content with the meditation object. It'll be interested in that meditation object, be very happy to be meditating. But the way to practice is to just keep establishing mindfulness on the breathing, the in and out breathing, the feeling of the breath as it becomes more refined. You don't have to interest yourself in these different experiences of piti. Let them take place by themselves, but you don't have to make anything out of them. When one experiences piti to its fullest extent, these experiences one experiences completely, the mind will be very firm and one-pointed in its meditation object, and then it will experience sukha, or happiness, pleasure. In the beginning of the practice, that act of putting your attention on the breathing, establishing attention on the breath, that is what we call vitakka. And that act of sustaining awareness on the breath, you could say thinking or pondering about the breath, this is what they call vitakka. One is not thinking about other things, pondering other things, one is just thinking about the breath, pondering the breath. This is vichara. When one is establishing awareness on the breath, there's vitakka. One is pondering the breath, there's vichara. And piti arises, and sukha arises. There's pleasurable interest in the meditation object, and there's feelings of happiness, of rapture. Then the mind will be very firm and one-pointed on its object. As the mind becomes more and more refined, mindfulness becomes more and more refined, and the mind becomes one-pointed, focused on the breath, the actual physical feeling of the breath will subside or disappear, and you'll be left with this one-pointed knowing. With these 5 factors, vitakka, vichara, piti, sukha, and the final one, ekaggata, one-pointed or focused attention on the breath. When all those 5 factors are present, then, for instance, the mind might hear a sound. You might hear a sound, but the mind won't be bothered by that sound. It won't go out to that sound. This, you could say, the mind has become calm at the first level, or the preliminary level of calm. The mind will be very still and withdrawn inside itself, with no thinking, no proliferation or wandering thoughts. You could say that the mind of the meditator that has reached this stage is the mind that is practicing the path or marga. It's the mind that is progressing along the path. It's restrained and peaceful from all different sense objects, mind objects, thoughts. The mind doesn't wander or stray off to the left or to the right, above or below. It's very centered, one-pointed, in the middle of things. Having been like this, in this state of stillness, one-pointedness for a certain period of time, the mind will then withdraw or come out of that state and start to experience thoughts and sense objects again. When that happens, when the mind starts to think, to wander again, or to experience different sense objects, mindfulness will immediately be there to see what happens, to see the mind as it starts to move. You will see very clearly that if the mind moves out from this place of one-pointedness, if it starts to move off following a thought or a sense object, then that will be the cause for it to suffer in some way. But if the mind is able to catch itself as it starts to move off from the place of peace with a thought, following a sense object, if it catches itself and then lets go of that, then it won't lead on to any suffering, it won't suffer. If the mind is truly calm, then as it experiences different sense objects and thoughts, wisdom or insight will see very clearly that these are the source of suffering if it attaches to them, and it won't let the mind attach to them. This is the benefit or the purpose of calming the mind, because it provides a foundation for mindfulness and insight, which will lead the mind to freedom from suffering or liberation from suffering. So practicing sitting meditation like this is the beginning of the practice, which is something you should all try to do and endure the difficulties or obstacles that you might face as you practice like this. It's quite natural that some days you'll feel more peaceful, experience more peace. Other days you might be very confused, agitated. You should aim to look after your mind from the very first moment when you wake up in the morning, to practice mindfulness and to develop samadhi and look after your mind at all times. If you don't try practicing mindfulness throughout the day, from the time you get up in the morning, then you'll tend to be thinking, proliferating, imagining all sorts of things throughout the day. And even if you come in the evening to sit meditation, it'll be very difficult to calm the mind down, to get much peace if you haven't been thinking about or practicing mindfulness throughout the day. And the things that are obstacles, or the things which will make us not peaceful, they're around us all the time, they exist all the time. These obstacles or hindrances to peace of mind are in short, attraction and aversion, sleepiness and depression, agitation, restlessness and irritation, and doubt and uncertainty. So to help deal with these different hindrances and help arrest them from the beginning, we have to use various tools in the practice, such as the practice of dana or generosity and renunciation, and the keeping of precepts, sila, or moral restraint. The practice of spreading loving kindness or metta is one technique for cooling the mind. This can be a very important tool to support the practice of meditation and support the arising of samadhi. And whatever level of samadhi you can attain, use that as the foundation or the basis for contemplating the three characteristics of impermanence, suffering and not self. Try and look after and watch over your mind from moment to moment and not let it get caught into any kind of suffering. As far as the practice of samadhi goes, maybe in the course of just one day you might only be able to make your mind a bit peaceful just once, or even only once in practicing meditation over a period of many days. You might only experience peace just once. That's quite natural in the beginning, but don't get discouraged. Keep putting effort into the practice. Keep being consistent with your effort. So I'll give you these reflections as a basic introduction to the practice of meditation for today. I hope they're of use to you and that you understand what I've been saying. It's enough for the moment. For the next period, if anybody has any questions, wants to discuss anything about meditation, please feel free to ask. Yeah.
In the text that I've read, jhana has often been defined in terms of the presence of the five jhana factors as describing in the absence of the five hindrances. Does jhana involve leaving the body and no longer having perception of the body and sensations on the body? Does it involve that?
If the mind is focused on an object and become very, very firm and one-pointed in that object to the level of what they call apana samadhi, then it won't think about anything else other than that one object during that time. Won't experience any sensations from the physical body, and even if you were to try and think of something else, you couldn't during that period. Be completely one-pointed. The samadhi, the characteristics of apana samadhi is the mind is completely focused on itself and not interested in anything else at all. He says if anyone feels they've experienced piti or what they call rapture, these various experiences he was describing, if anyone feels they've had some such experiences, please raise their hand. If anyone feels if they've seen lights or had any kind of experience where they felt very calm, peaceful, very full, the word he uses like full, please raise your hand. There's a few. Has anyone felt like being floating the body very, very light, almost as if it's floating.
บางทีมือหายไปข้างนึงบางทีขาเนี่ยหายไปบางทีหายไปทั้งตัวเลยว่า
Anyone experience like maybe the various limbs completely disappear from you no longer feel your arms or your legs or even your complete body completely seems to disappear and there's just left a kind of emptiness. Anyone experience that kind of thing? I'll just recap on what he said first before that last question. He said these various experiences, if you do have them, they're all very good and they help encourage you to keep practicing. These are the sort of experiences to be looking for as you're meditating. Not to get discouraged if you haven't had any such experiences yet, but if you do, it's good, because if you are working with a lot of agitation, confusion all the time, then it can be quite tough, obviously. There was a question just then about if you're very peaceful and then appear to fall asleep within your meditation and yet at the same time there's still awareness there, then what's that? And the answer was, it can happen like that it appears as the mind becomes peaceful, it appears as if you're falling asleep, but you don't completely lose awareness as when you enter deep sleep. The physical experience is as if you're entering deep sleep, but there's still left there. There's still an awareness left there. He said it's like being aware within your sleep, and it's not actually falling asleep. Although the physical experience is similar to falling asleep.
When the mind is very calm and you keep focusing on your breathing, suddenly, as if you are watching your body sitting there, and the mind seems to go out and watch the body sitting and doing meditation. Something like watching myself.
The experiences in the practice of samadhi tend to differ between people. There's no one set way that one experiences these different aspects of piti. The gentleman just described one thing that happened to him. He seemed like getting very peaceful, mind say separated from the body and was looking back at the body sitting meditation. That's very common, that happens quite a lot. And if that happens, you should try and get skilled in getting to that point. And then when you have the feeling like your mind is separating from the body and looking down at the body or looking back at the body sitting meditation, then when you're in that state to contemplate the body, look at the body and start contemplating the three characteristics. And that can lead to the rising of insight. As you're contemplating like this, as if you're looking back at your own body and contemplating the three characteristics, you might have some kind of sign or deep insight, seeing the impermanent nature of the body, seeing the body changing in some way, and that'll give rise to insight or vipassana insight.
If you've been contemplating in that way, would you just continue the contemplation so long as it was coming from a peaceful state, which was off the concentration, would you then return back to the initial object of meditation?
Yes, that's correct. If your contemplation or if your practice of insight, clear seeing of the three characteristics, degenerates, if the level of calm of the mind degenerates, that practice, that clear seeing of the three characteristics will not be sustained, and instead of clearly seeing the three characteristics, one will start proliferating or just thinking again in the ordinary sense. So then one has to go back to one's meditation object and re-establish samadhi, say recharge the mind or re-energize the mind, because it's this energy of samadhi which supports the practice of vipassana. And for that reason, samadhi is a very important and indispensable part of the practice.
I'm just learning about Buddhism and Buddhist meditation. You mentioned about there's 3 characteristics of the body or something just there. Could you explain what they are?
These 3 words in Pali, they're Anicca, Dukkha, Anatta, which translate, one way of translation is impermanence, suffering and not self. These 3 characteristics can be found within each one of what they call the 5 khandhas, or the 5 groups. And these 5 groups are what make up a person or a personality. Now, one person has these 5 groups. There's rupa, which is the physical form; vedana, which is like all the feelings one experiences, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral; sanya, which is like memory and perception; sankhara, which is like all the thought formations, the things we think about; and vijnana, which is consciousness, the mind which is conscious. This is like the way the Buddha described a person, divided into these 5 groups. And these 3 characteristics, if you look very carefully, you can find them within all these 5 groups. And particularly in meditation, we concentrate firstly on the rupa khandha, the physical form, because it's very obvious, it's very coarse, both our own physical form, other physical forms, other people, or even physical objects in the world. And one starts to look at these 3 characteristics: suffering, impermanent suffering, not self, in the physical form, either one's own, other people, or physical objects around. If you're contemplating physical form, then some examples of contemplating the physical form in light of these 3 characteristics. Physical form, say that this body, our body, is something that's impermanent. It's constantly changing from moment to moment. The body is changing in different ways, and it's something that has a point when it's born into the world, and it gets old and it dies. And you can contemplate this back and forth in many different ways and see this impermanence of the body. And because it's something that's impermanent, then it's something that must inherently be something that is suffering, or you could say it has an unsatisfactory nature because it doesn't last. Because it's always changing and it's something that's going to degenerate, to break up, it's not something that's truly satisfying. It must be something that's suffering. And it's also beyond control. It's beyond your control. You can't stop that process. The fact that it's going to get old and die, you can't control it. So in that sense, you couldn't say that it's a true self or a lasting self, because it's beyond your control. It's just something that it gets old and dies, gets born, gets old and dies. It's just an example of how to use these 3 characteristics to contemplate the physical body.
This question. During meditation, sometimes I have this memories of things I've forgotten, but it came back during meditation. Is this part of the 2 characteristics that we're talking about too?
These memories, these different memories that come up, are things that arise and pass away. And so you can take them as an object for mindfulness. Just watch the arising memories that arise and watch them pass away. But if mindfulness isn't strong enough, then you won't be able to do that. When memories come up, then they'll stimulate further thought proliferation, and you get up into all kinds of stories and imaginations and things. So to practice mindfulness, developing mindfulness so that you can see them simply in terms of being things that arise and pass away. Does that answer the question?
One of my meditation experience last time is got to a stage I wanted to smile on the class. I don't know why that was what state of mind I had at the time. My question is, as soon as I notice that, should I go back to my breathing?
If you have, for instance, say you meditate and you feel like smiling or laughing, then try and establish mindfulness. And if there is mindfulness, then you can see that it's just a condition of the mind or a mood, and see that it's a mood that has causes, it arises and it passes away, and simply see it as a mood of the mind, not to attach to it.
Is it that when you practice mindfulness all the time, your mind, your lesser and lesser thought will come, because you just watch, you are not interested in it, and it will go away, and eventually no thoughts will be coming in. Is it due to mindfulness that when your mind is very still and calm, no thoughts at all coming in, that you are entirely blank, just focus on the breathing? Is it due to sharp mindfulness?
If you're practicing mindfulness of breathing, then you are recollecting the breathing, so you're not recollecting anything else, thinking about anything else. So if there is consistent mindfulness, then naturally all other kinds of thinking will stop. You could say this is a way of exercise or training the mind, just like when you work out or physically train the body with different exercises and sport. Then this is like to train the mind. You have to train the mind like this in mindfulness, train it to be mindful, and that's the way it becomes strong and vigorous.
Can you please explain how we could cultivate the Brahma Vihara? I could understand how we could cultivate metta through metta bhavana, but what about the karuna, mudita and upekkha?
Practicing the 4 Brahma Viharas, metta bhavana, one establishes the thought, one wishes oneself well, wishes oneself happiness, and one wishes other beings happiness, or wishes them to be well. Karuna bhavana, one establishes the thought that those other beings who are experiencing suffering, may they get beyond that suffering. And also oneself, if one has suffering, one experiences suffering, then the thought for oneself to get beyond that suffering. Mudita bhavana, one establishes the thought that when other beings experience good things or experience happiness in some way, one supports that happiness, encourages it, and is happy that these other beings are experiencing happiness. And similarly with oneself, if oneself has experienced some good thing, some happiness, then one is happy that one has experienced that happiness. Upekkha bhavana is, say, it's a reflection on the law of karma. One understands that other beings, oneself and other beings, we all do some good karma. Sometimes we do bad karma, and have to reap the results, experience the results of that karma, good and bad karma. One understands that all beings are the owners of their karma, they're the heirs of their karma. Karma is their refuge. They can't get beyond the results of their karma. They have to experience all the fruits, the results of their karma. So one understands that, and say one makes one's mind peaceful within that understanding, so that as one sees other beings experiencing the fruits of their karma, good and bad karma, one isn't disturbed. One has a sense of peace within that. You understand? Is that?
Is mindfulness a conditioned phenomenon, and it is a conditioned phenomenon that is got relationship with the sila?
Sati is a conditioned phenomenon. It's a sankhara. It's a wholesome sankhara, punyapi sankhara. But because it's a sankhara, it still comes under the three characteristics. It's impermanent, suffering and not self. But it's a very, very important dhamma which is essential for the practice. It's the restraining force on the defilements, on any kind of craving. Sati or mindfulness is what restrains greed, hatred and delusion. It's what restrains, say, liking and disliking in the mind when it arises. If mindfulness is weak, then that restraining force is weak or even disappears, and then the defilements and craving will start to have an effect on the mind and even in one's speech, one's actions. So it's a very, very important dhamma. That answer the question?
In order to strengthen mindfulness, you see an important conditional factor.
Sati and sila help each other, they support each other. If one has the intention to keep sila or to be moral, lead a moral life, that's a sign that there is a right view in the mind when there's that intention there. Right view or samadhi. If there's right view, then there will be effort towards right speech, right action, right livelihood. And these various factors of the Eightfold Noble Path, they all work together, they help each other. So whenever there's samadhi, then it will be giving rise to, as I said, sama vaca, sama kamanta, sama ajiva, and also sama vayama, right effort, sama sati, right mindfulness. These factors, they work together. Say, like you could say, samadhi is the forerunner. Right view is the forerunner of these other factors. So they're all encouraging, they're all supporting the arising of the other factors as well. Each factor helps to support the arising of other factors. Did you have a question?
When I was cut here, I read in the book that it is one of the four jhanas that satisfaction and mentioned in the real and balance also. And so it is becoming a sankhara, and it's going to be impermanent thing.
Sorry, what?
Mentioned as impermanent thing as well. It is, I'm just confused because how can something which has to become enlightened become
Alright.
impermanent or...
Talking about sati as a indriya or as a pala or as a bojjhanga, one of the factors of enlightenment. These are all dhammas which in the practice of satipatthana foundations of mindfulness, they're all, you would contemplate them as Dhammanupassana Satipatthana. One would contemplate any of the factors of enlightenment, for instance, say Sati Bojjhanga or Viriya Bojjhanga or Upekkha Bojjhanga or any of the others. One would contemplate them, seeing that they arise and they pass away, seeing that there is not a self in that mindfulness as an enlightenment, even though it is a factor of enlightenment, but that mindfulness is still something that is not self. It's still something that's impermanent. If one attaches to it, then it's a cause of suffering. If these factors of enlightenment arise, and one attaches to them, one invests a sense of self in them, then they're still a cause of suffering. And the practice of Dhammanupassana Satipatthana or any of the other Satipatthanas is to see the lack of self in all Dhammas, all phenomena, conditioned phenomena. So even these very factors of enlightenment, one has to contemplate them in terms of the three characteristics, so as to not attach to them, because whenever one attaches, then a sense of self arises, and that's a cause for suffering.
The Dhamma is Dhamma has not self, so just come to Dhamma not that. But some mention as something Dhamma jati just a permanent, different.
Yeah, I might have slipped up there. He was talking about not self. I think I said Anicca, but he was talking about not self, seeing the not self in all dhammas. When the mind, when the factors of the path, the 8 factors of the noble path, unify in a mind, sila, samadhi, panya, come together in the mind, it's at that moment that the mind, you could say, makes the decision, or makes the verdict, takes the verdict that these 7 factors of enlightenment, for instance, are things not to attach to, or the very factors of the path, sila, samadhi, panya, are things not to attach to. When the mind makes that decision, it makes a decision not to attach, then it becomes independent, free, even from these factors of enlightenment, even from sila, samadhi, panya. It becomes free from all these things. The synopsis of what he said.
So attachment is problem. So we should not have anything, and we start down also at the end. That's what we say.
One shouldn't attach even to dhammas. One shouldn't see any form of dhamma as self. That answer your question?
That is, when you are enlightened, you don't have to attach to dhamma, because you have achieved the goal. It is for the others who are not enlightened, dhamma is necessary.
As long as one is still practicing, then you could say that these 8 factors of the path, or sila, samadhi, panya, they're like a boat, and you're like somebody who's travelling, has to cross some water to a piece of land across the water. As long as one hasn't reached that piece of land, one has to one depends on the boat. So one depends on sila, samadhi, panya. As long as one is practicing and hasn't completely experienced Arya Pala, or the fruits of the Arya path, then either in part, or if one still has not let go completely, maybe one has even let go in part, but one has not yet let go completely, then one still has to depend to some extent on that boat. It's only somebody who's completely gone beyond the water, or gone to the further shore, to the other piece of land. That's the only person who can completely let go of the boat. Sorry?
When the 8 senses of enlightenment are 8 senses converge, the mind makes a ready. And this means that one enters the meaning of the other. The mind makes a ready. When 8 senses converge.
It means the mind sees the truth about conditioned phenomena or sankharas. One sees the truth of the way they are.
Mindfully, when you concentrate to the departed, how do you receive?
Sorry?
When you concentrate to the departed,
right.
how do you receive?
If one does some act of goodness, say one practices generosity in some way, helps somebody in some way, or consciously keeps precepts, develops the intention to keep precepts, keep sila, or practices meditation, for instance, then one can dedicate the goodness that one has generated, or spread metta, using that goodness as a basis, using a wholesome mind as a basis. One can spread or dedicate that wholesomeness to other beings, both beings who are still alive and beings who are dead. If other beings, dead or alive, are in a position to acknowledge that and receive that goodness in some form, and if your mind is, say, if the goodness you generate is strong enough, then they can receive some of that goodness. There's a story Ajahn used to talk about concerning this thing. In his very early years, when he was wandering around the forests of northeast Thailand, there was one time when he was staying on his own in a forest, very remote, long way from the nearest village, and he caught malaria, and he was getting weaker and weaker. He'd go on alms round every day, but it eventually got to the point where he couldn't go on alms round, so he was going without food, and he had malaria, so he got very weak and near to death. And one morning actually passed out for a long time. At that time, his relatives back in his home village, a long way away, probably a couple of hundred kilos away, I think, he hadn't been in touch with them for a long time, because in those days there wasn't much of a postal system, there was no telephone, of course. They hadn't seen him for a long time, and they assumed he'd died. So they all got together this day and went to the local monastery and made an offering of alms to the monks and dedicated the merit to him, assuming he was dead. And by coincidence, that day was the day he passed out. And when he woke up, having passed out for quite a long time, very weak, but when he woke up, he felt unusually well, very full, and say physically much stronger, invigorated, felt quite peaceful, even though he hadn't had any medicine or nothing, he hadn't had any food that day. And it was such an unusual experience for his physical well-being to suddenly improve like that he noted it down in his diary, the day and the date. And later on he recovered, and later on, when he got back to his home village a long time after that, he asked his family about during that period, what had they done anything, and they said they'd gone to the monastery, and he knew the day, the time that they'd made this offering, and he often would recount this story as an example of how the act of a formal act of making an offering or doing some good act and then formally dedicating the merit of that act to another being, in this case to him, it really works.
If someone sees the vibrating in this way, this is concerned in that way, sometimes he
Sees what? If, say for instance, you have a dream and maybe see some relatives who have died, what you can do is perform some act of generosity, goodness, and then dedicate the merit of that to that relative. At the very least, your own mind should feel good. It should bring up wholesome qualities in your own mind, so that's good karma for you. And if that dead relative is in a position where they can receive a transference of merit or receive the goodness, some of that goodness that you've dedicated to them, then they will, and that will also help them. On another level, you can contemplate it in terms of the Dharma and just see that your relatives, the people you know, everyone we know, we're all impermanent phenomena. We all have our time. We're born, we get old and die, and just bring that reflection into your own heart. Having seen your relatives pass away, then remind yourself that one day you're going to pass away. So to try and make yourself at peace with that thought. The question was, if we dedicate merit or spread metta to our living relatives, say our children, our offspring, brothers and sisters, people, does that help? Can it help? The answer is yes, of course. Any act of spreading metta sets your own mind up with a wholesome mood, a wholesome mental state, and that sets up a set of causes and conditions, and you could say the flow of your mind, the positive flow of your mind, or the wholesome flow of your mind, will, in ways which we might not be able to see, will start flowing towards that person or persons who you're dedicating merit to. Your ability to help them, or the amount that you can help them or transfer merit, that will depend on each individual's various qualities and abilities.
What is the significance of transferring from merit to the God and thereby to the already got about merit?
The reason or the importance of dedicating merit or spreading metta to other beings who are in, you could say, heavenly realms, higher realms, devatas, gods, goddesses, celestial beings, even though they might appear to already be very beings with high minds, very refined minds, why should we spread merit to them? They already are very high, very refined, very developed. Well, spreading metta, dedicating merit to these beings, implies that your own mind is recognizing or accepting or understanding the very qualities of mind which make those beings, which give those beings a heavenly rebirth. The important ones being what they call hiri ottappa. Hiri is like a sense of shame, and ottappa is a fear of wrongdoing, a wholesome fear of wrongdoing, not just a kind of blind fear, a wholesome fear of wrongdoing. These qualities of the devata or the celestial being, if oneself is spreading metta, dedicating merit to these beings, it's like a recognition of these very powerful and wholesome qualities in those beings, and by that it's like bringing forth these very qualities within one's own mind, recollecting those good qualities in one's own mind, and so one is raising the level of one's own mind. It's a kind of practice to raise the level, to refine one's own mind. But the Buddha actually taught to spread metta to all beings, what they call apamanya, without limitations, without boundaries. So that includes everybody, whatever realm, whatever their state of mind, good, bad, lower realms, higher realms, animal realms, human realms, whatever, to try and develop that as a practice to spread metta in all directions to all beings. Whatever happiness one receives, one wishes other beings to be equally happy. That's probably the best way to do this practice.